Why is it that two intelligent, kind, well-meaning people can look at the same issue and see complete opposites? Why do politics and religion divide families, nations, and even lifelong friends? What if I told you? It's not because people are stupid or evil, but because our minds are built to justify, not to seek truth. Jonathan Haidt argues that we are not rational creatures searching for facts. We are emotional creatures searching for allies. And once you hear this, you'll never look at a debate, or even your own opinions, the same way again. Hello, everyone.
Hi, all.
And welcome to BookPodCastZone. I'm Emma, your guide for this journey, eager to unpack some truly profound insights with you today.
And I'm John. My role is to help us connect the dots, offering context and deeper meaning as we navigate this fascinating material. Today, we're embarking on an extensive deep dive into Jonathan Haidt's groundbreaking work. We're specifically drawing from The Moral Compass, A Journey with Jonathan Haidt.
And this isn't just like a quick summary.
No, not at all. This is going to be a really comprehensive exploration. We're planning to cover his ideas chapter by chapter.
Right. The goal is to really dig in, understand the nuances, and hopefully transform how you, our listener, understand human morality, why we disagree so much, and maybe how we can connect better.
Exactly. It's potentially transformative stuff. So let's get started.
Okay, so Chapter 1. You know, we often walk around thinking we're these paragons of logic, right? Especially when it comes to our deepest convictions about what's right and wrong. We sort of tell ourselves this story that we've carefully constructed our moral compass through, I don't know, reasoned thought and objective evaluation.
Like we sat down with a spreadsheet and listed pros and cons for every moral belief we hold.
Exactly. But what if that's not quite right? What if that whole picture is, well, kind of upside down? Imagine discovering that your strongest beliefs, the ones you'd argue passionately about, maybe even end friendships over.
Well,
What if they aren't actually born from careful deliberation?
what if they come from something deeper, more primal?
That's exactly where Jonathan Haidt invites us to begin this journey. He starts by peeling back the layers of our self-perception, especially our perception of ourselves as rational beings.
And what he finds underneath is, well, it's not what most Enlightenment thinkers would have expected. It challenges that whole tradition.
It's a really profound starting point, isn't it? Because Haidt directly challenges that cherished notion we hold about ourselves, that reason is king.
He does. He argues pretty forcefully that our ethical compass isn't solely or even primarily a product of conscious, rational deliberation. That comes later, maybe.
So where does it come from then, according to him?
He introduces this idea that our early life experiences and the culture we're born into, the stories we hear growing up, the values our families and communities instill in us, often without us even realizing it.
The stuff that just sort of seeps in?
Exactly. That, combined with our evolutionary predispositions, the way our brains have been wired over millennia for survival in social groups, these things significantly shape what we instinctively perceive as good or bad. It's not just about learning a set of rules from a book or a parent consciously teaching you. It's about forming these deep, intuitive responses that often operate way below the surface of conscious thought.
Like a moral reflex.
That's a great way to put it. The core argument he's making is that morality is more often felt instinctively, a gut reaction that arises really quickly, almost instantaneously, rather than being purely reasoned out step by step. He argues it's rooted in our primal human nature, this pre-programmed moral reflex that just kicks in.
Okay, that's the real aha moment for me. Or maybe, like you said, the uh-oh moment, right? When you start to really internalize those intensely held moral convictions, the ones you feel so passionately about, the ones you're absolutely ready to defend.
The hills you die on, so to speak.
Yeah. Those might actually originate from gut feelings, from those formative, almost subconscious early experiences, or even just our evolved nature, rather than pure, unadulterated logic that we applied carefully.
It's a bit unsettling.
It really is. Honestly, that insight can feel a little vulnerable. It forces you to question the very foundations of your own self-identity and, frankly, your sense of righteousness. You might find yourself thinking, hold on a second. Have I just been really good at rationalizing something all this time, something that I just felt was right, without ever truly putting it through a rigorous logical examination?
And Haidt has a term for that, right? The post hoc justification.
Exactly. The powerful impact of realizing that many of our so-called careful thoughts are, in fact, these post hoc justifications, meaning we decide first based on that gut intuition.
The feeling comes first.
And then our brilliant, amazing human minds work tirelessly, like little lawyers in our heads, to construct the rational arguments, find the evidence, build the case to support that pre-existing feeling.
It's a total flip of the script from how we usually view our own reasoning. We like to think reason leads and feeling follows, or at least is kept in check. Haidt says nope, often feeling leads, and reason scrambles to catch up and justify the path taken.
And when you take that idea and apply it to what's happening out there, especially here in the US, it suddenly explains so much, doesn't it? Think about the intensity we see in current social media debates, say looking ahead into 2025.
Oh, absolutely. It's a perfect lens.
You see these endless threads, these arguments about controversial social issues. Maybe it's about, I don't know, climate change policies or AI regulation or some new cultural flashpoint.
Or even just reactions to a political candidate's latest statement.
Right. And what often happens almost immediately, people jump to these instant moral labels. This action is good, that person is evil, this policy is disgusting, that one is obviously right. There's very little room for nuance.
All black and white, instantly.
Yeah. And it feels like those quick, instinctual judgments are what really fuel the divisions online. Complex arguments get flattened, reduced to these immediate moral reactions.
You can almost picture it. Someone scrolling through their feed, they see a headline about maybe a proposed change to healthcare access or a debate about teaching history in schools.
Right.
Before they even click the link, before they read the details or understand the different perspectives, bam, their deeply ingrained moral intuition has already fired.
Categorized it instantly. This feels right, or this feels threatening, or this is just fundamentally wrong.
And that initial emotional reaction, that gut feeling, then becomes incredibly sticky. It's really resistant to any subsequent factual corrections or deeper analysis that might come along later.
So even if more information comes out that contradicts the initial take,
It often doesn't matter as much as we'd hope. The intuitive dog, as Haidt will later call it, has already bolted off in one direction. And the rational tail is just furiously wagging, trying to explain why the dog's path was the only correct one, rather than objectively assessing the landscape or considering alternative routes.
wow, okay. That makes genuine dialogue where people are actually open to changing their minds based on new information or arguments.
Incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Because you're not just arguing facts, you're often arguing against a deeply felt pre-rational conviction.
So it's not just about a simple difference in opinion, like preferring different flavors of ice cream. It's more like a difference in deep-seated, often unconscious moral feelings or sensitivities. That feels profound.
That's exactly it. Haidt is masterful in setting the stage here for understanding why we so often clash over values. He's suggesting it's not simply about having differing logical positions or different interpretations of the same data, although that happens too. It's often about fundamentally differing moral intuitions, those gut feelings that were formed early on, shaped unconsciously by our unique blend of life experiences, cultural background, and perhaps even our evolutionary inheritance.
Which really poses a huge question for all of us, doesn't it?
It does. If our beliefs, especially our moral beliefs, are so deeply embedded, so visceral, so immediate, how can we possibly hope to truly engage, to find common ground with others who feel just as strongly, just as intuitively, but in the completely opposite direction on a given issue?
It really lays bare the central puzzle of human moral psychology, the thing that makes navigating our social world so complicated and often so painful.
And that's the puzzle we'll be digging into throughout this deep dive, using Haidt's framework as our guide.
Okay, a lot to think about just from Chapter 1. Before we move on, if you're finding this exploration valuable, please do like, subscribe, and share for more updates. We'll continue our deep dive into the next chapter right after this. All right, so building on this foundational idea that morality often springs from intuition, Haidt introduces one of his most, well, I think his most famous and vivid metaphors in Chapter 2.
The dog and its tail. It's really sticky.
It really is. He asks us to picture our mind as like a loyal dog. That's our intuition wagging its tail. That's our reason. The key part. Intuition leads and reason follows. This isn't just a cute image he cooked up. He argues it fundamentally flips our traditional understanding of how we make decisions right on its head.
It really does challenge centuries of Western thought.
For sure. I mean, we've been taught, especially since the Enlightenment, to revere logic, right? To aspire to be purely rational thinkers. We're told to base our important decisions on careful evidence and reasoned arguments. Think Spock, not Kirk.
Right? The ideal is the cool, detached, logical mind. Emotions are seen as messy, disruptive, something to be overcome or controlled by reason.
But Haidt suggests a much more nuanced and frankly much more human process is actually at play. One where our emotions or intuitions are often the real drivers in the seat.
Yeah, this metaphor is absolutely central to his work. The intuitive dog, as he calls it, represents our gut feelings, those immediate emotional reactions, and all those unconscious judgments that just spring forth, often without us even realizing we've made a judgment.
It just happened.
It just happens. And this dog is powerful, it's immediate, and it often has a mind of its own, doesn't it? It's driven by those early life experiences, those cultural inputs, and those evolutionary predispositions we talked about in Chapter 1. It's reacting instantly to the world based on its programming.
And then there's the tail.
Then there's the rational tail. This tail represents our conscious reasoning, our logical processes, our amazing human ability to articulate arguments, to find evidence, to build a case.
The part we usually think is in charge.
The part we think is the dog. But Haidt's critical assertion, the real twist, is that the tail typically serves primarily to justify or rationalize the decisions the dog has already made. So the tail, in this analogy, isn't acting like an impartial judge, coolly assessing facts and weighing alternatives to arrive at the best conclusion.
It's more like a lawyer, or maybe a press secretary.
Exactly. It's more like an advocate or, a press secretary, diligently finding the best possible arguments and evidence to support the direction the dog has already instinctively chosen. It's defending the dog's actions after the fact.
So the core concept here is that our logic isn't the primary driver, not the engine pulling the train. It's more like the caboose, or maybe the sophisticated commentary track explaining why the train went down that particular track.
Precisely. It's a tool for post hoc rationalization. We feel first, then we think second, and that thinking is often aimed at explaining the feeling, not questioning it.
Wow. That's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? For many of us, I think.
It can be deeply unsettling.
Yeah, that intellectual challenge of shifting from this deeply held belief in pure reason as our primary guide, our superpower, to embracing the raw, often messy power of emotional instincts. It's like finding out the pilot isn't really flying the plane most of the time.
It definitely can lead to a sense of vulnerability. It forces us to admit, or at least consider, our own personal biases. And not just biases in a simple sense, but the fundamental bias towards intuition. It makes us acknowledge the very real limitations of our own logical processes.
Because who really wants to think that their brilliant, well-constructed arguments, the ones they're so proud of,
The ones you spent hours crafting.
right, who wants to think those are just clever window dressing for a gut feeling they had in the first microsecond? It's uncomfortable.
It's a deeply uncomfortable truth, potentially, that what we often genuinely believe is objective, unbiased reasoning is, in fact, subtly influenced or maybe even entirely driven by these deeper subconscious currents that we're barely aware of.
It really makes you pause and reflect on, like, every debate you've ever had, every decision you felt so certain was logically sound. Was it really? Or was my intuitive dog just really insistent and my rational tail really good at its job?
It's a humbling thought, absolutely. And it has huge implications for how we think about persuasion and argument.
And it's not just a philosophical idea, right? There's actual evidence for this.
Oh, definitely. When we connect this to the broader picture, there's a wealth of real-world U.S. psychology studies on decision-making that provide robust evidence supporting this intuition-first model. Think about confirmation bias, for instance. This is a classic one. People actively seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses, while giving disproportionately less consideration to alternative possibilities.
Right.
We ignore contradictory evidence, essentially.
Our rational tail is very good at finding evidence for our dog's position.
Exactly. Or consider the mere exposure effect. Simply being exposed to something repeatedly makes us like it more, often without any conscious awareness or logical reason. Why do you prefer that brand of coffee? Maybe just because you see its logo every day. That's the intuitive dog forming an affinity.
That happens all the time in advertising and branding.
Constantly. And this whole concept plays out profoundly in today's fast-paced U.S. news cycles, especially online. Initial headlines, maybe a provocative image, or emotionally charged sound bites, they often shape public opinion incredibly rapidly.
The dog reacts instantly to the emotional cue.
Precisely. And once those views are entrenched by the dog's immediate reaction, this is outrageous, or this is wonderful, any subsequent detailed analysis, even if it presents contradictory facts or crucial context, struggles immensely to change minds. The initial intuitive judgment holds sway.
We see this with reactions to, say, a new political scandal, or maybe different interpretations of economic data, or even public health recommendations during a crisis. The first impression sticks.
The intuitive horse has essentially left the barn before the rational rider even gets the saddle on.
That's a good way to put it. And you see it beyond news, too, right? Like in how we buy things.
Absolutely. We see this constantly in consumer behavior. Why do people often buy a specific brand of car, or stick with a certain smartphone ecosystem, or even choose one type of laundry detergent over another?
It's rarely because they did a massive spreadsheet comparing all the features and prices.
Almost never. More often, it's an emotional appeal. Maybe the advertising made them feel good, or it aligns with their self-image. It could be a sense of familiarity, an ingrained habit, or perhaps an aspirational feeling connected to the brand. That connection triggers the dog.
That feeling, that emotional pull, often trumps any detailed logical analysis of product features, long-term value, or objective specifications.
And it's the same in politics with endorsements. The emotional appeal of the endorser, their charisma, their perceived trustworthiness, maybe just how they make us feel safe, inspired, angry, can create a powerful gut feeling of affinity or opposition towards the candidate they're backing.
And that feeling can be far more effective, far more persuasive than a comprehensive summary of the candidate's actual policy platform or voting record.
Exactly. The dog responds to the emotional resonance of the endorser or the message, and the tail then diligently finds all the reasons why that emotional response was perfectly logical and justified.
It sounds like Haidt is really doing more than just offering a metaphor. He's fundamentally challenging our traditional, almost Enlightenment era view of the rational mind being in control.
He absolutely is. He's effectively turning it upside down, or at least showing it's much more complex partnership than we thought, with intuition often holding the reins. And in doing so, he's urging us, really compelling us, to rethink how we engage in everyday arguments, how we try to persuade others, and even how we make our own internal decisions.
It has huge practical implications.
Immense. This insight suggests that merely presenting facts and logical arguments, no matter how well-reasoned, might simply not be enough to change minds, especially when those minds are being confidently led by a very powerful, emotional dog.
So just throwing data at someone whose intuition is pointing the other way probably won't work.
It's often like bouncing pebbles off a tank.
Yeah.
Haidt suggests that if you want to make progress in a discussion, if you genuinely want to influence someone or bridge a divide, you might have to find a way to speak to the dog first.
Address the intuition, the feelings.
Yes. Address those underlying intuitions, acknowledge the feelings, maybe find common ground on an emotional level before you even try to engage with a rational tail. You need to calm the dog or gently guide it before the tail will even listen.
That's a fundamentally different approach to communication and persuasion than most of us typically use. We usually lead with the facts, the logic.
Right. We lead with the tail, hoping it will wag the dog. Haidt says, good luck with that. You need to understand the dog first.
Okay, another really powerful chapter. If you're gaining new perspectives from this deep dive, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it. We'll be back to explore Haidt's next big metaphor right after this break.
All right, so if the intuitive dog leading the rational tail wasn't already a pretty radical idea, Jonathan Haidt then takes this metaphor and, well, he sort of supersizes it in Chapter 3.
Yeah, he doubles down, essentially.
He does. He asks, what if your emotions, your intuitions, weren't just a dog? What if they were a massive elephant? And your conscious thoughts, your reasoning, just a tiny rider perched on top, desperately trying to steer or mostly just holding on for dear life.
It's an even more dramatic image, isn't it? It really highlights the power imbalance.
Absolutely. This image immediately reveals the profound, almost overwhelming dominance of feelings, intuitions, and gut reactions over facts and logic in how we form opinions and make choices. It's not just a subtle influence anymore. It's this vast, powerful force, the elephant, that our conscious mind, the tiny rider, is only nominally in charge of. Maybe. Sometimes. It's such an impactful visual because it immediately conveys the sheer scale of the challenge our rational minds face. Trying to control or direct these deeply ingrained emotional responses is like that tiny rider trying to wrestle a 6-ton elephant into submission.
Good luck with that.
Exactly. So this chapter truly reinforces and expands on the dog and tail metaphor, but with an even greater emphasis on the power difference between our intuitive emotional system, the elephant, and our rational conscious system, the rider.
So the elephant is system 1, the rider system 2 in Kahneman's terms.
You could definitely draw that parallel. The elephant represents that fast, automatic, intuitive, emotional processing system 1. It's immense, it's powerful, and it tends to go where it wants, driven by instincts, habits, and deeply felt convictions. It has incredible momentum.
And
the rider is our reason, our conscious thought, our deliberative fine system 2. But in Haidt's model, the rider is comparatively tiny, weak, and often just serves to provide justifications or rationalizations for the elephant's chosen path. Now, the writer isn't completely useless. Haidt suggests the writer can, with great effort, consistency, and skill, try to subtly influence the elephant's direction. Maybe by planning a long-term route, offering gentle tugs on the reins, or perhaps training the elephant over time with reinforcement.
But it's not in direct control, especially in the heat of the moment.
Rarely, if ever, does the rider dictate the elephant's immediate path, especially when the elephant is strongly motivated, maybe it's scared or angry or sees something it really wants. In those moments, the elephant goes where it wants.
And Haidt makes it explicitly clear here. The formation of our opinions, our moral judgments, is overwhelmingly swayed by these powerful emotional responses. Factual information often plays a secondary supporting role.
Right. Facts are often recruited by the rider after the elephant has already leaned in a particular direction, serving mainly as fuel for the rider's justifications, not as the primary cause of the leaning.
Okay, confronting this illusion of complete rational control over one's own beliefs and actions, that can be incredibly unsettling, can't it?
Deeply unsettling for many people.
We pride ourselves, especially in weird cultures, on being thoughtful, logical individuals who master our emotions. We think we're the writer, and a competent one at that.
To realize that so much of what we consider our reasoned positions, our carefully considered beliefs, might actually be an after-the-fact justification for an emotional decision or an intuitive leaning. That's a really humbling thought. It challenges our sense of agency.
But you mentioned earlier there's a kind of paradox here, right? While it's humbling, it can also lead somewhere positive.
Exactly. There's a fascinating potential upside. This realization, this newfound humility about our own rational capabilities can actually lead to greater empathy for others' viewpoints. Because if my powerful emotional elephant is driving me in one direction, often without my full conscious control,
then it's highly likely their equally powerful emotional elephant is driving them in another direction with just as much conviction and maybe just as little conscious steering.
Precisely. It inspires a profound sense of humility, recognizing how much of all of our decision-making is subconscious and emotionally driven. It's not necessarily a reflection of superior intellect or moral standing on anyone's part if we disagree.
It means we're all, to some extent, just writers trying to make sense of and maybe gently guide our own powerful elephants. And that really changes the way you perceive disagreement. It's less about who's right or wrong and more about understanding the different paths our elephants are taking.
It fosters compassion, potentially. And when we connect this elephant-rider dynamic to the larger social and political picture, we see it constantly at play. It's almost unavoidable.
Like in political campaigns.
Absolutely. Think about U.S. political campaigns, especially in the run-up to, say, the 2024 elections or ongoing debates in 2025. Appeals to raw emotions, fear, hope, anger, resentment, patriotism, tribal loyalty consistently win votes and garner support far more effectively than dry policy debates or complex statistical analyses.
The campaigns that speak to the elephant win.
Often, yes. Political ads, for instance, are frequently masterpieces in speaking directly to the elephant, completely bypassing the writer's analytical faculties. They rarely dive deep into detailed legislative proposals, economic models, or foreign policy nuances.
Instead, what do?
Instead, they focus on emotionally resonant imagery and narratives. Maybe it's a candidate surrounded by their smiling family, emphasizing traditional values and stability, speaking to the elephant's desire for security and order. Or maybe it's a dramatic, ominous ad painting an opponent as a dangerous threat to our way of life, or national security, or economic prosperity, speaking directly to the elephant's fear and protective instincts.
Those visuals, combined with powerful music, evocative language, maybe a simple, repetitive slogan.
They're all designed to go straight for the elephant's gut, stirring deeply felt emotions, creating an intuitive lane before the writer even have a chance to analyze the claims.
We also see this in how the public reacts to big events, right?
Definitely. Consider public reactions to national crises or tragedies. Maybe a major natural disaster hitting a region, a mass casualty event, or a significant national security incident. The collective emotional responses, shared grief, outrage, fear, a surge of solidarity, often guide the subsequent policy discussions and public demands far more powerfully than any objective data, expert recommendations, or careful long-term strategic planning might suggest.
The shared emotional experience, the collective elephant herd moving in one direction, becomes a dominant force, sometimes overriding purely rational considerations about the best course of action.
The writer is basically told, get us out of this feeling, or do something to express this outrage.
So, Haidt is really pulling us deeper and deeper into the emotional core of human nature here, highlighting its immense, almost overriding power in shaping our social and political lives.
Exactly. He's showing us that understanding our elephant, both our own internal one and, critically, recognizing and respecting the elephants driving others is absolutely crucial for effective communication and for navigating disagreements constructively.
It implies that if you genuinely want to influence someone, if you want your message to be heard and truly considered, not just bounced off.
You might need to speak to their elephant first. You have to find a way to connect on an emotional level, address their feelings, their intuitions, their underlying values, their fears, their hope.
Build some rapport with the elephant.
Build rapport, show empathy, maybe find some common emotional ground. Only then, Haidt suggests, can you effectively engage with their rider, presenting the facts, the logic, the reasoned arguments.
Trying to reason directly with an agitated or determined elephant is often completely futile. You need to find a way to get the elephant to want to listen, to want to consider going in the direction you're suggesting.
It requires emotional intelligence, not just logical prowess.
Okay, this elephant and rider model feels like a really core piece of his whole argument. Thanks for unpacking that. If this deep dive is helping you understand these concepts, please take a moment to like, subscribe, or share. We'll apply these ideas to politics next. All right, so we've got this image now. The intuitive elephant is largely in charge, and the rational rider is often just along for the ride or maybe acting as a PR agent.
It's a powerful framework.
It really is. And after understanding the sheer power of that emotional elephant, it makes perfect sense that the political arena would be like exhibit A for these dynamics playing out in the real world.
Politics is arguably where the elephants roam most freely.
That feels right. So have you ever wondered why political ads, campaign speeches, rally slogans, why they seem to tug at your heartstrings or maybe make you angry or scared far more often than they actually engage your analytical brain?
Why they aim for the gut, not the head.
Exactly. Jonathan Haidt delves right into this in Chapter 4. He breaks down the persuasive techniques, the almost psychological tricks that subtly sway our choices in leadership and policies, often completely bypassing our rational defenses.
It's a fascinating and sometimes slightly disturbing look behind the curtain of how political power is sought and gained. It really confirms what many of us might instinctively suspect about political persuasion, but couldn't quite articulate in these psychological terms.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us the vocabulary for it. So how does he apply the elephant and rider model here?
Well, he takes that powerful concept and extends it directly into the realm of political persuasion. He explains precisely how campaigns, often guided by very savvy strategists and consultants who understand human psychology intuitively, if not academically.
They know how to push the buttons.
They absolutely know how to push the emotional buttons. They effectively engage our moral intuitions, our elephants. They understand, implicitly or explicitly, that to win votes, to build a following, it's rarely enough to simply present a logical argument or a detailed 50-page policy paper.
People's eyes just glaze over.
Exactly. The elephant gets bored or wanders off. So you have to activate the emotional responses, the gut feelings, that underpin people's worldviews and political identities. Haidt details how politicians and their strategists tap into what he later calls the fundamental moral taste buds, these core intuitive concerns like fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, care, liberty, which we'll definitely explore in much more detail in a later chapter.
Okay, so they target these specific moral sensitivities.
Yes, to appeal to voters on a visceral emotional level rather than a purely logical one. This strategy includes the expert use of compelling narratives. Stories are incredibly powerful for engaging the elephant. It includes using potent symbols like flags, religious icons, historical figures that evoke strong feelings, and it involves using emotionally charged language words like freedom, security, betrayal, disaster, hope, specifically designed to awaken voters' elephants and get them leaning in a certain direction.
Can you give an example of how that might look in practice?
Sure. Consider a candidate appearing in a carefully staged town hall meeting. They might not spend much time on policy details, but instead, they tell a moving personal story about overcoming adversity or about meeting a struggling family whose plight deeply affected them.
Connecting on a human level.
Exactly. This isn't just conveying information. It's crafting a narrative designed to evoke empathy, admiration, maybe a sense of shared experience or shared values.
Yeah.
It speaks directly to the emotional core, to the elephant, bypassing the need for a detailed policy breakdown. The feeling the story generates, this person cares, or this person understands people like me, becomes the persuasive element.
And realizing that we are all susceptible to these forms of emotional manipulation, whether we consciously acknowledge it or not, that can be a real eye-opener, can't it?
Profoundly important.
It's easy to sit back and think, oh, those people are swayed by emotions, but I make rational choices. But Haidt reminds us, no, we are all human. We all have powerful elephants. Our own elephants are just as susceptible to these appeals, maybe just different kinds of appeals.
Acknowledging that shared vulnerability is key.
Yeah, and for me, that insight really sparked a desire for more aware, more critical engagement with political messages. Not just accepting them at face value, but asking, okay, what feeling is this ad trying to evoke in me? Which part of my elephant is it trying to nudge?
It creates a healthy skepticism.
It does, and it highlights that constant tension we live with, wanting to be that perfectly rational, informed voter, the ideal democratic citizen we learned about in civics class, while also recognizing the deep-seated emotional pulls, the tribal loyalties, the intuitive biases that influence us all.
It's a humble but vital reminder that our own rider, our own conscious reasoning, might not be as independent or in control as we'd like to believe, especially when faced with skillfully crafted emotional appeals.
It really urges us to examine not just what we believe politically, but why we believe it, and how those beliefs might have been shaped by appeals to our elephant over time.
And to give this some timely, concrete context, we can link this directly to recent U.S. elections. Think about the patterns we saw in the 2024 campaigns, or even in ongoing local or state-level elections happening now in 2025. You see these timeless patterns in voter behavior that Haidt describes so clearly.
Like specific slogans.
Absolutely. Consider specific examples of campaign slogans or advertisements that clearly targeted emotional responses rather than detailed policy discussions. Think about the enduring power of slogans built around concepts like hope and change, or others that emphasize making America great again, or maybe campaign ads that focus intensely on generating fear of the other side or warning of an impending threat if the opponent wins.
These aren't logical arguments laying out policy steps.
Not at all. They are potent emotional rallying cries. They speak directly to a sense of aspiration or nostalgia or anxiety or tribal identity. They bypass the writer's analytical processing and go straight for the elephant's feelings, trying to create a strong positive or negative intuitive lean.
And what about attacks?
We can also examine the pervasive use of personal stories and character attacks in U.S. politics. A candidate's carefully crafted anecdote about overcoming personal struggle or serving the community can be far more convincing and emotionally resonant for many voters than a detailed explanation of their proposed tax plan. Conversely, an attack focusing on an opponent's character, maybe questioning their honesty, patriotism, or values, even if based on flimsy evidence or taken out of context, can quickly activate an emotional aversion in voters. It causes their dog or elephant to recoil instinctively, regardless of the factual accuracy of the attack. Emotion trumps analysis.
So Jonathan Haidt is really shining a bright light on the hidden, often subconscious emotional dynamics that underpin so much of our democratic process. He's helping us understand why politics often feels so visceral, so personal, so infuriating.
Indeed. He's suggesting that understanding these intuitive processes, these powerful emotional appeals, is absolutely key to becoming a more informed citizen and a more effective participant in our democracy. It's not about eliminating emotion that's impossible and maybe not even desirable, but about becoming more aware of it.
It challenges us to look beyond the surface arguments presented by politicians, pundits, and campaigns, not just to scrutinize the facts they present, which is still crucial, but also to critically analyze the underlying moral and emotional appeals they're actually making. What buttons are they trying to push?
It's about becoming a more discerning consumer of political information. Recognizing when your elephant is being directly addressed, maybe even manipulated, versus when your rider is being engaged with genuine, reasoned arguments. That awareness is the first step toward more conscious political engagement.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, before we broaden our view beyond just Western perspectives, if you appreciate this deep dive into political psychology, hit that like button, subscribe, or share it with someone who might find it useful. We'll explore weird morality next.
Okay, this next chapter, Chapter 5, feels like it really zooms the camera out, way out. It forces us to confront a potential blind spot many of us, especially in the West, might have.
It's a really crucial broadening of the perspective.
Yeah. What if your entire view of right and wrong, the very bedrock of your moral universe, the things you assume are just human nature, what if it's fundamentally shaped by a surprisingly narrow cultural lens?
A lens that makes it incredibly hard, maybe even impossible, to truly understand people from different backgrounds or cultures.
Exactly. Jonathan Haidt challenges us here to look beyond our own familiar perspectives, to truly widen our moral horizons. This chapter feels like such a necessary corrective, especially in a world that often, perhaps completely unconsciously, assumes its own specific moral framework is universal or somehow superior. It directly asks us to confront our own cultural biases, our own potential ethnocentrism.
So how does he frame this? He uses an acronym.
He does. This is where Haidt introduces the powerful and frankly somewhat provocative acronym, WEIRD.
WEIRD. What does that stand for?
It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic.
Okay. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic.
And his core argument is that a vast amount, arguably the overwhelming majority, of psychological research on morality, and by extension, our general public understanding of what morality even is based almost exclusively on studies conducted with participants who fit this very specific WEIRD profile.
So mostly university students in the US, Europe, Australia.
Precisely. And the critical insight here, the kicker, is that WEIRD populations, while constituting a significant portion of the global academic community and holding disproportionate economic and cultural influence.
They are not representative of global morality or human psychology overall.
Exactly. Haidt argues they are, in fact, a global outlier. Psychologically, they might be among the least representative populations on Earth you could study if you want to understand humanity broadly.
Wow. That's a strong claim.
It is, but he backs it up with cross-cultural research. This chapter essentially expands our horizons dramatically. It forces us to consider incredibly diverse global perspectives on ethics, showing us how fundamental moral foundations and priorities can differ radically across cultures.
So things we take for granted as obviously moral might not be seen that way everywhere.
Absolutely. What one WEIRD culture might see as an absolute, universally applicable moral imperative, for instance, maximizing individual autonomy and personal choice above all else.
Like the ultimate freedom to be yourself.
Right. Another non-WEIRD culture might view that same emphasis on radical individual autonomy as deeply selfish, immature, or disruptive to essential community harmony, family obligations, or spiritual duties. They might see it as morally questionable or even harmful.
So it's not just about different surface-level beliefs like dietary rules or specific rituals. It's about fundamentally different ways of structuring morality itself, different core values.
That's exactly the point. The very definition of what constitutes the moral domain can differ. For WEIRD people, morality often focuses heavily on individual rights, harm, and fairness between individuals. In many other cultures, morality extends much further to include duties to the group, respect for hierarchy and elders, loyalty, spiritual purity, and upholding traditions.
Breaking free from those familiar, deeply ingrained, weird cultural biases, that can be a profoundly humbling experience, can't it? But also potentially really liberating.
It can be both. Humbling because you realize your perspective isn't the only one, maybe not even the majority one. Liberating because it opens up a much richer, more complex understanding of humanity.
Yeah, it makes you realize that your internal moral compass, while deeply felt and perfectly valid for you within your context, isn't the only legitimate one out there, nor is it necessarily universal or objectively superior.
And that understanding genuinely fosters a broader sense of connection, potentially. You start to recognize the validity, the internal logic, and maybe even the evolutionary or social function of different moral frameworks, even if they clash with your own.
But you're right, it's not always comfortable. There can be a real discomfort, maybe even a defensiveness, that arises from realizing that what feels universally right to us, what we've taken for granted as just obvious common sense or basic human decency, is in fact culturally specific.
It forces us to confront our own ethnocentrism, the tendency to view the world primarily through the lens of our own culture, which can be a difficult but ultimately incredibly rewarding process of introspection and growth.
So how does this weird perspective help us understand current events, maybe looking at 2025?
Well, when we connect this to the bigger global picture, we constantly see how differing cultural moralities often underlie international conflicts, diplomatic tensions, or deep misunderstandings over values. For example, consider U.S. foreign policy debates regarding promoting democracy or human rights in other nations. These efforts are often driven by a distinctly WEIRD moral framework, assuming that certain individualistic rights like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to private property, democratic voting, are universally paramount and desired.
And that assumption can clash pretty hard with other cultures.
It can clash profoundly with more collectivist moralities elsewhere that might prioritize group harmony, national stability, respect for authority, or fulfilling one's duty to the family or community above individual expression or political dissent. This leads to genuine, often frustrating misunderstandings, where each side feels morally justified but talks past the other.
And does this apply within the U.S. too?
Absolutely. Closer to home, consider internal U.S. debates, where different cultural groups within the nation clash over values. Think about the persistent divides between, say, more individualistic urban centers and more community-focused rural areas, or clashes between different ethnic and religious communities holding distinct moral priorities on issues like family structure, education, or social obligations.
Like debates about the role of community versus individual responsibility?
Exactly. Discussions around communal responsibility versus individual liberty often highlight these internal cultural or subcultural moral divides. One group might emphasize strict individual autonomy and self-reliance as the highest moral good, heavily focused on the Liberty Oppression Foundation, perhaps. Another might prioritize community well-being, social safety nets, and mutual obligation, perhaps rooted more in care harm or loyalty. This leads to very different policy preferences and moral judgments on everything from public health mandates and environmental regulations to social welfare programs and tax policies.
So again, it's not just disagreements about facts or efficiency. It's often clashes between these fundamental moral lenses shaped by different cultural streams even within one country.
Precisely. Haidt is really urging us to take a crucial step outside our own cultural bubbles, whether that bubble is defined by our nationality, our education level, or our local community, to truly grasp the staggering diversity of human morality.
It's a call for intellectual and moral expansion.
It really is. He's inviting inclusivity and a much more nuanced appreciation of human moral diversity. It urges us to actively question our assumptions, to develop what he called moral humility, and to consciously avoid projecting our own weird morality onto others, whether they live across the globe or just across the political aisle.
Right.
Recognizing that there are many valid ways to build a moral functioning society is a huge step.
Wow, okay. Expanding our view beyond weirdness. Got it. If you're finding this journey insightful, help others discover it by liking, subscribing, or sharing. Next up, we get into the specific flavors of morality Haidt identifies. Okay, so we've established that morality often comes from intuition, the elephant runs the show, and our own cultural background, especially if it's weird, gives us a specific but not universal lens.
We've laid some important groundwork.
Definitely. So if morality isn't one size fits all, and it's not just about weird versus non-weird, how do we even begin to categorize these differences in a more detailed way? How do we map the moral landscape?
That's the challenge Haidt tackles next. And his solution is ingenious.
This is where he introduces one of his most revolutionary concepts, right? The idea that morality isn't a single universal flavor like, say, vanilla.
Exactly. He argues it's much more like our sense of taste. It's like a menu of different moral flavors that we each have receptors for, but we might prefer or be sensitive to different flavors in different combinations.
And understanding this variety, this moral palette, can unlock why people think so differently, why they react so differently to the same situation.
Precisely. This metaphor of moral taste buds is incredibly intuitive. Once you hear it, it just clicks for a lot of people.
Right.
It moves us beyond simply saying people have different values, which is kind of vague.
Right. It doesn't tell you what those values are or how they work.
Exactly. Haidt provides a tangible framework for identifying what those core values or moral intuitions actually are and how they operate, almost like identifying the primary colors of our moral world.
Okay, so let's get into it. This is moral foundations theory, right? What are these taste buds?
Yes, this is the core of moral foundations theory. Haidt, along with colleagues like Craig Joseph and Jesse Graham, proposed that just as our tongues have evolved receptors to detect key tastes relevant to survival, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, our minds have evolved psychological receptors or foundations to respond to a specific set of recurring social challenges and opportunities in our ancestral past. These foundations function as innate or at least easily learned gut-level responses to certain patterns in the social world. They trigger those flashes of intuition, the elephant leaning.
And how many are there? What are they?
They initially identified 5 and later added a 6th, which is sometimes treated slightly differently, but is now generally included. So the 6 core moral foundations are: first, care harm. This is our evolved sensitivity to the suffering, distress, or harm of others, particularly the vulnerable. It underlies virtues like kindness, compassion, and nurturance. Think of the feeling you get when you see someone hurt.
Okay, care harm. That seems pretty fundamental.
Very. Second, fairness cheating. This foundation relates to our sensitivity to issues of justice, rights, reciprocity, and proportionality. It's about wanting things to be equitable, punishing cheaters, and upholding contracts. It can manifest as concerns about equality, but also about proportionality, people getting what they deserve.
All right, fairness cheating. Makes sense.
Third, loyalty betrayal. This is about our ability to form cohesive groups, coalitions, and feel strong identification with our in-group. It underlies virtues like patriotism, self-sacrifice for the group, and vigilance against traitors or threats to the group. Think team spirit, but on a larger scale.
Loyalty betrayal. Got it. The tribal instinct again.
Very much so. Fourth, authority subversion. This foundation relates to our evolved responses to social order, hierarchy, and legitimate leadership. It underlies virtues like respect for tradition, obedience to lawful authority, and maintaining social stability. Think about respecting elders, traditions, or established institutions.
Okay, authority subversion. That one feels potentially more controversial in some weird contexts.
It definitely is, and we'll get to why. Fifth, sanctity degradation. This foundation is rooted in our disgust response and relates to valuing purity, holiness, and avoiding contamination, whether physical, moral, or spiritual. It underlies virtues related to piety, cleanliness, controlling bodily desires, and treating certain objects or principles as sacred. Think about feelings of reverence or revulsion.
Sanctity degradation also seems less emphasized in some modern contexts, maybe.
Often, yes. And finally, the sixth foundation, which was added a bit later, is liberty oppression. This is about our resentment and resistance to domination, coercion, and illegitimate control by others. It underlies the demand for freedom, autonomy, and pushback against bullies or tyrants. Think, don't tread on me.
Liberty oppression. Okay, so those are the six. Care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty.
That's the core set. And the crucial point Haidt makes is that individuals, cultures, and political groups often prioritize these taste buds differently. It's not usually that one group completely lacks a foundation, but that they have different sensitivity levels or place different weight on each one.
Like some people love spicy food and others can't stand it.
Exactly like that. Some individuals or groups might be highly sensitive to issues of harm and care, reacting strongly whenever they perceive suffering. Others might react most strongly to perceived disloyalty, challenges to authority, violations of fairness, threats to liberty, or actions they see as degrading or impure. This variety in our moral taste profiles ultimately defines individuals and groups, shaping their moral matrix, their overall worldview. And it perfectly explains why the very same issue, say, a controversial new law, a social protest, or a personal decision can evoke vastly different moral judgments and incredibly passionate responses from different people, even people who seem otherwise similar.
Because they're tasting different moral flavors in this situation.
Precisely. They're not necessarily wrong or immoral from their own perspective. They're just operating on a different set of moral priorities, emphasizing a different combination of these deeply felt taste buds.
Wow. Okay. That feels like it could be a massive emotional turning point for how we view disagreement.
It really can be.
The ability to appreciate moral differences without immediate judgment. To stop thinking someone is inherently wrong or bad or stupid or evil just because they have a different stance on a hot-button issue.
And instead, to start understanding that they might simply be operating on a different set of moral priorities, giving more weight to loyalty or authority while you're primarily focused on care or liberty, perhaps.
Yeah. And that shift, it could potentially turn conflict into curiosity, right? Instead of just wanting to shut down the opposing view, it fosters a desire to understand the underlying moral logic of the other side. To ask, okay, which moral foundation is most active for them right now? What are they trying to protect or uphold?
It moves away from condemnation and towards diagnosis, in a sense, understanding the moral recipe they're using.
And there's a tremendous relief, I think, that can come from realizing disagreement isn't always about malice or ignorance or stupidity. It's often about these fundamental, deeply rooted differences in our moral foundations.
It's a game changer for how you approach difficult conversations, whether it's with family, coworkers, or people online. It encourages empathy and intellectual humility. It moves us away from assuming ill intent and towards understanding different moral architectures.
Can we apply this to some current U.S. debates? How would these taste buds show up?
Oh, absolutely. When we connect this framework to current U.S. cultural and political debates happening around 2025, it illuminates so much. Let's take the ongoing debates about, say, tech platform content moderation.
Okay, big one. How do the foundations play out?
Well, one side might argue strongly for stricter moderation, focusing intensely on the care harm foundation, wanting to prevent harassment, misinformation that causes harm, or the emotional distress caused by hate speech. They might also invoke fairness, arguing for protecting vulnerable groups from disproportionate online attacks. The other side might push back vehemently against moderation, emphasizing the Liberty Oppression Foundation, framing it as censorship, a violation of free speech, and oppressive control by powerful tech companies or the government. They might see any restriction as a slippery slope towards tyranny.
So, care and fairness versus liberty. Two different primary taste buds being activated.
That's exactly. Or think about debates surrounding climate change policies. Those advocating for aggressive action often highlight care harm, the potential suffering caused by environmental damage, the impact on future generations, harm to animals and ecosystems. They might also invoke fairness regarding environmental justice for disadvantaged communities. Those who are more hesitant about aggressive policies might emphasize liberty oppression concerns about government overreach, restrictions on economic freedom, the burden on individuals and industries. They might also sometimes invoke loyalty to their nation's economic interests or traditional ways of life, or even authority by questioning the scientific consensus or trusting different experts.
You can see the different moral flavors really shaping the arguments. What about something like vaccine mandates, which you mentioned earlier?
Perfect example. One side clearly prioritizes care harm. The mandate protects public health, prevents widespread suffering and death, shields the vulnerable. It's seen as a moral imperative to care for the community. They might also invoke fairness, everyone doing their part for the collective good. The other side often emphasizes liberty oppression, arguing passionately against government overreach, defending individual bodily autonomy as a paramount right, resisting perceived coercion. They might also sometimes bring in sanctity degradation, feeling that injecting foreign substances violates bodily purity or natural order, or even authority subversion by distrusting the government or medical establishment figures promoting the mandate.
Understanding these different foundational appeals really enhances our ability to grasp the legitimacy from an intuitive standpoint of both sides, even if we personally land strongly on one side. You can see why they feel the way they do.
Precisely. Arguments about free speech, as we saw, often root deeply in liberty. Arguments for creating safe spaces or restricting hate speech might root primarily in care harm. Recognizing this underlying moral architecture allows us to dissect the debates more effectively, moving beyond surface-level disagreements.
So Haidt is really adding a lot of richness and granularity here. He's moving beyond just simple categories like liberal conservative or weird non-weird.
He absolutely is. He's not just providing a framework for understanding moral disagreements, he's giving us a powerful tool set for analyzing them in a more constructive, nuanced, and potentially empathetic way. It offers us a much-needed vocabulary to describe the often unspoken moral bedrock of our beliefs, the intuitive why behind the what. And that allows for potentially more productive dialogue and less reflexive condemnation when we encounter views that differ from our own. It helps us see the moral logic, even if we don't share it.
This feels incredibly useful. Okay, if moral foundations theory is clicking for you, let us know with a like, subscribe, or share. Next, we'll see how Haidt applies these taste buds directly to the political spectrum. Okay, so now that we've unpacked these 6 moral foundations, care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty, this is where, for me at least, everything really comes into sharp focus for understanding the world around us, especially the political world.
This is where the theory gets incredibly practical and explanatory for everyday life.
Totally. Politics isn't just about abstract policy differences or who has the better personality. Haidt argues it's built on these deep-seated moral pillars, these different sensitivities to the moral taste buds that we often don't even realize are there, but that he shows us are constantly active, constantly shaping our political leanings and reactions.
This chapter is incredibly powerful because it offers such a sharp, clarifying lens through which to understand the persistent, often bewildering, and increasingly intense divides in our political landscape, especially here in the U.S.
It helps explain why the very same issue, immigration, climate change, healthcare, education, can elicit such vastly different and equally passionate, equally morally charged responses from different political groups. It's not just disagreement. It's often moral outrage on both sides.
What's fascinating and what Haidt does so effectively here is how he applies moral foundations theory directly to political ideologies, particularly mapping it onto the liberal-conservative spectrum in the U.S. context with remarkable clarity and predictive power.
So he connects the taste buds to political labels. How does that work?
He meticulously maps out how people who identify as liberal or progressive and those who identify as conservative tend to draw on different combinations and place different emphasis on those 6 moral foundations we just discussed. It's like they have different default settings on their moral taste receptors.
Okay, so what's the typical liberal profile according to Haidt?
Based on his research, Haidt observes that liberals and progressives tend to heavily prioritize and rely most strongly on 2 foundations in particular. Care harm, showing strong sensitivity to suffering, injustice, oppression, and the needs of vulnerable individuals or groups. And fairness cheating, especially fairness understood as equality, social justice, and rooting out systemic discrimination or exploitation. Their moral concerns often revolve around protecting the vulnerable, ensuring equal rights and outcomes, and challenging oppression.
So care and fairness are the dominant flavors for the liberal palate. What about the other 4?
Liberals certainly recognize and value the other foundations to some extent, but Haidt's data suggests they tend to give significantly less weight to loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and sanctity degradation compared to care and fairness, and sometimes even view strong emphasis on those foundations with suspicion. e.g., seeing strong group loyalty as potentially exclusionary, respect for authority as potentially authoritarian, or appeals to sanctity as irrational or infringing on individual liberty. Liberty oppression is important too, especially fighting against group-based oppression.
Okay, so a more focused moral palette, primarily care and fairness equality, and liberty from oppression. What about conservatives?
Conservatives, Haidt argues based on his findings, tend to utilize all 6 foundations more broadly and often more equally. While they certainly care about care harm, though perhaps defining harm or care differently sometimes, and fairness, often emphasizing proportionality or procedural fairness more than equality of outcome, they also tend to strongly incorporate the other foundations into their moral matrix.
So they rely just as much on loyalty, authority, and sanctity.
His research suggests they give significant weight to loyalty betrayal, emphasizing patriotism, group cohesion, defending the nation or community, and valuing fidelity. They also strongly value authority subversion, emphasizing respect for tradition, legitimate institutions, law and order, and social stability. And they rely on sanctity degradation, valuing things like purity, moral order, traditional religious values, and protecting things deemed sacred or wholesome from perceived corruption or contamination. Liberty oppression is also key, often framed as freedom from government interference.
So conservatives have a broader, more evenly distributed moral palette, using all 6 taste buds more regularly.
That's the general pattern his research indicates. And this fundamental difference in the moral profiles, the specific constellation of moral taste buds being activated and prioritized, explains precisely why specific policies, political messages, or even just certain words or symbols resonate so differently across the political spectrum. They are literally tapping into different wells of moral intuition, different sets of deeply felt values.
Okay, that feels like such a crucial emotional turning point for anyone trying to understand political polarization. Just grasping that idea.
That's potentially perspective shifting.
Yeah, because it allows you to see the inherent validity, maybe not agreement, but the intuitive moral validity in rival political views. Even if you fundamentally disagree with their conclusions or proposed solutions, you can start to see why they feel so strongly.
This understanding can significantly reduce the intense anger, the contempt, the demonization we so often feel toward the other side. It reframes their positions not as evidence of outright malice or ignorance or stupidity, which is such a common and destructive assumption.
Right, how could they possibly believe that? They must be evil or dumb.
Instead, you can reframe it as stemming from different moral priorities, a different sensitivity profile across these fundamental moral foundations. They're reacting strongly to a perceived threat to loyalty or authority or sanctity, while you might be reacting primarily to care or fairness concerns in the same situation.
It truly encourages a shift, doesn't it, from that immediate, visceral, emotional condemnation they're wrong to a more detached, intellectual curiosity about these differing moral matrices. Okay, why does this issue trigger their authority foundation so strongly? What threat do they perceive?
It's not necessarily that they're wrong in their morality from their perspective. It's that they value different moral flavors more intensely in that context. And that shift from judgment to understanding feels incredibly vital, almost like a prerequisite for navigating our current highly polarized climate.
Can we walk through another U.S. example using this political lens, maybe immigration?
Sure, immigration is a perfect example where these differing foundations clash starkly. Conservative arguments for, say, building a wall, increasing border security, stricter enforcement, often appeal strongly to loyalty betrayal, the idea of protecting the in-group, the nation and its citizens, from perceived outsiders, maintaining national identity, and ensuring fidelity to the country. They also lean heavily on authority subversion, the importance of upholding laws, respecting national sovereignty, and maintaining the order of a controlled border. Sometimes sanctity degradation might be subtly invoked too, framing uncontrolled immigration as a kind of contamination of the national body or culture.
Okay, so loyalty, authority, maybe sanctity driving that position. What about the liberal perspective?
Liberal arguments for more welcoming immigration policies, pathways to citizenship, or focusing on the humanitarian aspects often appeal intensely to care harm, emphasizing the suffering of migrants and refugees, the moral imperative to help those fleeing violence or poverty, the harm caused by family separations.
Yeah.
They also strongly invoke fairness cheating, particularly fairness as equality or social justice, arguing for equal treatment, challenging discriminatory practices, or sometimes addressing historical injustices or global inequalities that might contribute to migration patterns. And liberty oppression is invoked when highlighting the plight of asylum seekers fleeing oppressive regimes.
So again, you see care, fairness, and liberty on one side clashing with loyalty, authority, and maybe sanctity on the other. They're almost speaking different moral languages about the same issue.
Exactly. And this differing emphasis on the foundations often leads to completely incommensurable arguments. Both sides feel deeply, genuinely morally righteous based on their prioritized foundations, but they often cannot understand or even recognize the moral validity of the other side's concerns. They're literally operating from different moral playbooks, each rooted in their own compelling set of intuitive moral taste buds.
Which explains why just arguing the facts about, say, the economic impact of immigration often doesn't bridge the gap. You're not addressing the underlying moral foundations driving the disagreement.
Precisely. The writer might be debating statistics, but the elephants are upset about perceived betrayal or perceived indifference to suffering.
So Haidt is really constructing a powerful framework here, not just for understanding polarization, but potentially for finding ways to have healthier political discourse. He's moving us beyond just shouting about policy details.
Absolutely. He's getting us down to the underlying moral drivers, helping us understand the why behind those policy positions that are held with such conviction and passion. And the implication is profound. Truly, bridging divides in our deeply polarized society might require us to first understand and actively acknowledge these fundamental moral differences. We need to recognize the other side's moral priorities, even if we don't share them, rather than just arguing about facts or policy details alone.
You have to somehow address the moral elephant in the room, understand its unique set of taste buds before any meaningful, persuasive dialogue between the writers can even begin.
It suggests a path forward based on moral empathy and understanding, not just logical debate.
Incredibly insightful. All right, if you're finding this framework helpful for understanding political divides, please like, subscribe, or share. Coming up, we'll look at group dynamics and why Haidt suggests conservatives might have a structural advantage in building cohesive groups. Okay, moving deeper now into how these moral foundations actually play out in society, especially in forming groups and political movements. Jonathan Haidt makes a really interesting and potentially controversial observation in Chapter 8.
Yeah, this one definitely sparks some discussion.
He suggests that in the intricate game of morals and politics, some approaches, some moral frameworks, seem to have built-in strengths when it comes to uniting people and building strong, cohesive groups.
He examines why certain mindsets, particularly conservatism as he defines it, based on moral foundations theory, appear to excel, psychologically speaking, in rallying individuals, fostering loyalty, and creating a powerful sense of collective identity.
And it's really crucial to emphasize up front, right? This isn't about him endorsing one political view over another as being inherently better or correct.
Not at all. That's a critical distinction he makes clear. This is intended as a descriptive, objective look at the psychological mechanics of group formation and sustained cohesion based on the differing appeals to the moral foundations. It's about sociological and psychological effectiveness in binding groups, not a judgment on the policies themselves.
Okay, so with that important caveat, what's the core of his argument here? Why might conservatism have this advantage in group cohesion?
Well, drawing directly from moral foundations theory, Haidt argues that conservative morality often demonstrates a particular advantage in creating and maintaining cohesive groups because it tends to draw on a broader set of moral foundations compared to liberal morality. As we just discussed, liberal morality often heavily prioritizes care, harm, and fairness equality, sometimes downplaying or being suspicious of the others. Conservatives, Haidt observes, tend to utilize all six foundations more broadly, including giving significant weight to loyalty betrayal, authority subversion, and sanctity degradation.
And those three additional foundations are particularly good at what? Binding people together.
Exactly. Haidt highlights how these additional foundations, loyalty, authority, and sanctity, are incredibly powerful unifying forces. They work together to foster a strong sense of shared identity, us, promote patriotism and group pride, loyalty, encourage respect for tradition, hierarchy, and established institutions' authority, and create a shared sense of moral order, purity, and sacredness, sanctity.
So they provide more kinds of social glue.
It's a great way to think about it. These foundations create more points of connection, more shared values, more reasons to cooperate, trust, and even sacrifice for the group. They build what sociologists sometimes call moral capital, the shared beliefs, values, and norms that allow a group to function effectively. Liberalism's focus on individual rights and challenging existing structures, important goals in themselves, sometimes doesn't provide the same robust binding mechanisms, Haidt suggests.
Okay, that definitely presents an interesting emotional turning point for many people reading this, I imagine, especially for those who don't identify as conservative.
It can be challenging to process.
Yeah, you have to balance this objective, maybe even grudging admiration for the unifying effectiveness of certain moral frameworks with a critical eye toward their potential downsides.
Right, because strong group cohesion, while powerful and often necessary, can sometimes lead to negative consequences like exclusion of outsiders, intolerance of dissent, xenophobia, resistance to necessary change, or upholding unjust hierarchies, the potential dark side of loyalty, authority, and sanctity.
So it pushes us toward more nuanced perspectives on political ideologies, moving beyond simplistic good team versus evil team narratives, and recognizing that different moral approaches have different psychological strengths and weaknesses when it comes to building and maintaining groups.
It's also the intellectual challenge of acknowledging effective strategies for group bonding and mobilization without necessarily agreeing with the moral content or the political outcomes those strategies produce.
You have to separate the analysis of the technique from your judgment of the goal.
Precisely. It truly requires a level of analytical detachment to examine these dynamics objectively, especially when they touch on such deeply felt political identities and values.
Can we see this playing out in the U.S. political landscape now, say in 2025?
I think we can. When we connect this to the evolving U.S. political landscapes in the mid-2020s, we can observe how different grassroots movements or established political organizations effectively rally their bases, often using these broader moral appeals Haidt describes. Think about successful conservative campaigns or community organizing efforts, maybe at the state or local level. They often very effectively utilize potent symbols of patriotism, the flag, national anthems, references to founding fathers, narratives of American exceptionalism. These strongly tap into the loyalty foundation.
You see appeals to traditional values, too.
Absolutely. Appeals to traditional family values, religious principles, or respect for law enforcement and the military. These resonate strongly with the authority and sanctity foundations, creating a powerful sense of shared identity, moral order, and purpose amongst supporters. They offer a clear sense of belonging and righteousness.
And how does this compare to liberal movements based on Haidt's theory?
Well, compare this perhaps to some of the challenges faced by certain progressive or liberal movements in forming a single, coherent, broad-based coalition that sticks together over the long term. While immensely powerful and effective in mobilizing people around specific issues of care harm, like fighting poverty or discrimination, or fairness equality, like advocating for civil rights or LGBTQ+ rights, Haidt's framework suggests that relying primarily on just these two foundations sometimes doesn't provide the same deep, encompassing, almost tribal group cohesion that a broader palette invoking loyalty, authority, and sanctity can achieve.
So different foundations might be better suited for different political tasks. Maybe some for challenging injustice, others for building stable groups.
That's a very insightful way to put it. It's not necessarily that one set is inherently superior overall, but that different combinations of moral foundations might lend themselves to different kinds of political action or group structure. Haidt is pointing out an observable psychological dynamic in how groups are formed, motivated, and sustained over time.
So he's really highlighting the psychological strengths found across the moral spectrum, but showing how a broader palette might be particularly effective for building strong group cohesion.
Precisely. He's urging us to understand the psychological tools, the moral foundations that effectively build and maintain group cohesion, regardless of our own political leanings or whether we approve of the groups being built. It provides crucial insight into the effectiveness of different kinds of moral appeals we see constantly in the U.S. political arena. It helps us understand why certain messages resonate so deeply with particular segments of the population, how movements gain traction and loyalty, and maybe why some groups seem more unified than others. It's about recognizing the architectural differences in how moral groups are constructed and maintained.
Very interesting perspective. Okay, if you're intrigued by this analysis of group cohesion, show some support with a like, subscribe, or share. Next, we dive even deeper into why humans are so group-oriented in the first place. For all our modern emphasis on individuality, personal freedom, being true to yourself, humans have this undeniably powerful, almost gravitational pull towards belonging to groups.
It seems fundamental to who we are.
It really does. It feels like a deep-seated craving, doesn't it? But it raises the question, at what cost to our individuality? Jonathan Haidt delves right into these powerful tribal instincts in Chapter 9, exploring their deep evolutionary roots.
He argues this isn't just like a minor social preference, a nice-to-have feature of human life. He positions it as absolutely fundamental to our nature, woven into our very being over hundreds of thousands of years.
And understanding this groupishness explains so much about human history, doesn't it? From ancient hunter-gatherer bands to modern nation-states, religious communities, political parties, even online fan groups today.
It's a core organizing principle of human society. What's truly fascinating here is how Haidt explores the evolutionary advantages of what he calls groupishness.
So it wasn't just random, it actually helped us survive.
Immensely so. Groupishness refers to our innate, deeply ingrained tendency to form groups, to cooperate intensely and effectively within those groups, and often critically to compete, sometimes quite fiercely, with other groups over resources, status, or territory. And Haidt explains, based on evolutionary theory, particularly multi-level selection, which is a bit complex, but basically argues selection can happen at the group level too, that this tribal instinct isn't some unfortunate flaw in human nature, some primitive relic we should try to overcome or suppress entirely.
We often talk about tribalism as a bad thing.
We do, and it certainly has its dark sides, which Haidt acknowledges. But he argues it's also a fundamental part of human nature that has significantly aided our species' survival and flourishing for millennia.
How so? What were the advantages?
Well, think about it from the perspective of our ancestors living in small, vulnerable bands. Being part of a cohesive, cooperative group offered immense advantages in those harsh environments. It meant better protection from predators, their safety in numbers. It allowed for more efficient hunting and gathering through shared effort and knowledge. It increased the chances of finding mates and successfully raising offspring, who were protected and provisioned by the group. And it enabled groups to undertake larger, more complex tasks, like building shelters, defending territory, or waging war against rival groups. Groups that were more cohesive and cooperative simply outcompeted groups that weren't.
So evolution favored individuals who were good group members, loyal, cooperative, willing to sacrifice for the team.
That's the core idea of group selection playing a role alongside individual selection. This chapter illuminates how our profound innate desire for belonging, our sensitivity to loyalty and betrayal, our urge for a collective identity, how these fundamentally shape our moral judgments and behaviors. We inherently tend to evaluate actions not just based on individual harm or fairness, but also on whether they help or hurt our group. Do they enhance our group's status or reputation? Do they strengthen our collective identity and cohesion? Or do they threaten it? Our morality is deeply intertwined with our groupish nature.
Recognizing that. Recognizing the powerful, often completely subconscious pull of groups in our own lives, that can be quite a revelation, can it? Almost an awakening to how much our decisions, our beliefs, our very sense of self are influenced by who we align with.
It really inspires a critical self-awareness. Where do my loyalties truly lie? How are those loyalties subtly, or maybe not so subtly, influencing my perceptions of the world, my judgments of others, even my core moral beliefs?
It can feel both comforting and unsettling at the same time. Comforting because belonging fulfills a deep human need. It feels good to be part of a we, part of a team. Unsettling to realize just how much our vaunted individual identity is actually intertwined with, maybe even dependent on, the groups we belong to. Am I really thinking for myself, or is my group thinking through me?
It really highlights that inherent ongoing tension within us.
Yeah.
The tension between individual autonomy, our cherished desire in many modern cultures to be unique, independent, self-determining individuals, and the powerful, innate human drive to be part of a collective, to find our place within a larger unit, to sacrifice for and find meaning in being part of a we.
And how does this groupishness manifest in the U.S. today in 2025?
Oh, everywhere. When we connect this to the broader picture, we can relate this directly to U.S. social movements, political affiliations, and even online communities. It helps us understand their dynamics so much better. Think about the intense fan bases for sports teams here. People paint their faces, wear jerseys, feel genuine elation when their team wins and dejection when they lose. That loyalty can be incredibly fervent, almost tribal, extending far beyond mere appreciation for athletic skill into a deep-seated communal identity. We won, they lost.
Or political parties.
Absolutely. Political parties often function as modern tribes. People identify strongly with being a Democrat or Republican, often inheriting that identity and feeling strong loyalty to the party's platform and candidates, and often intense animosity or distrust towards the opposing party. Online political echo chambers are essentially digital tribes, reinforcing in-group views and demonizing the out-group.
What about less obvious examples?
Think about local community groups, neighborhood associations, PTAs, volunteer fire departments, or specific activist movements focused on environmental issues, social justice, or religious causes. Even things like college fraternities and sororities, military units, or professional associations. These all exemplify how group identity manifests strongly in U.S. contexts, fostering deep bonds, shared rituals, and a strong sense of us.
And this group identity, it has both positive and negative sides, as you mentioned.
Definitely. We see how this strong group identity can foster incredible cooperation, trust, and altruism within the group, leading to amazing collective achievements, charitable work, and mutual support. But simultaneously, that same strong in-group loyalty can fuel suspicion, prejudice, and animosity towards outgroups. This is especially evident in the heightened political polarization we see across the U.S. today, where political identities often function as rival tribes, each with its own set of moral priorities, sacred values, and collective identity, making compromise or understanding incredibly difficult.
So, Haidt is really uncovering both the social glue that binds us together in cooperative units, but also, critically, the psychological forces that naturally divide us into competing factions.
Precisely. He offers a crucial evolutionary-informed lens through which to view our social interactions. He argues that understanding our deeply groupish nature, acknowledging it, not denying it, is absolutely essential for navigating a complex, interconnected, and often fractious world, both locally and globally.
It's about recognizing the profound power of the collective in shaping who we are and how we interact, and acknowledging that this groupishness, for better or worse, is a fundamental part of the human condition. It's not going anywhere.
We have to learn to work with it and manage its downsides.
Makes sense. Okay, if this exploration of our groupish nature resonates with you, please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing. Next, Haidt introduces a fascinating concept related to groupishness. The hive switch. Okay, so we're fundamentally groupish creatures. But Haidt takes this idea a step further in Chapter 10, introducing a truly fascinating, almost mystical-sounding psychological phenomenon.
Yeah, the hive switch.
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of science fiction, but he argues it's a real aspect of human psychology.
He asks us to imagine flipping a switch inside ourselves. And suddenly, you're no longer just an individual focused on your own needs and thoughts. You feel like you've merged into something far bigger than yourself, moving in sync with a collective purpose, feeling an intense connection to everyone around you.
It's those moments where the self seems to just dissolve into the group.
Exactly. Jonathan Haidt describes these powerful, unifying, often ecstatic moments as activating the hive switch. It's an almost magical concept, trying to capture those rare but profound times when our normal sense of individual self-interest seems to melt away, and we feel utterly connected to a larger whole, acting almost as a single, unified organism, like bees in a hive.
But it's important to clarify, these aren't literal physical switches in our brains, of course.
Right, it's a metaphor.
It's a powerful metaphor for a suite of psychological mechanisms and specific types of experiences that, under certain conditions, temporarily suppress our focus on the individual self, our ego, our personal concerns, and instead activate a profound sense of collective identity, shared emotion, and common purpose.
So what kinds of experiences can flip this switch? How do we get into that hive state?
Haidt describes how various kinds of experiences seem particularly effective at triggering this switch. They often involve losing yourself in something larger than yourself, usually in the presence of others. Think about shared rituals like a moving religious service, a solemn patriotic ceremony like a military funeral, a deeply meaningful graduation, or even just singing familiar songs together around a campfire. These coordinated activities can synchronize people emotionally and behaviorally.
Collective effervescence.
Exactly. That's Emil Durkheim's term that Haidt borrows. That feeling of collective effervescence you might get at a massive music concert where everyone is dancing and singing the same lyrics, feeling the same rhythm, lost in the shared energy of the crowd, or the intense camaraderie and shared purpose felt by soldiers in battle or firefighters working together to save a building.
Synchronized movement seems key too.
Yes, synchronized movements are incredibly powerful hive switch triggers. Things like dancing together in a group, marching in a parade, doing coordinated chants or cheers at a sporting event, even just swaying together to music. Moving in unison seems to blur the lines between individuals.
What about awe?
Experiences of awe are also potent triggers. Being confronted with something vast, beautiful, or powerful that makes your individual self feel small and connected to something much larger. Think staring up at the stars in a dark sky, looking out over the Grand Canyon, witnessing an incredible act of heroism or moral beauty, or even being deeply moved by a piece of art or music. These moments can induce that feeling of self-transcendence and connection.
And what does it feel like when the hive switch is flipped?
Haidt subjective experience is often involving incredibly powerful feelings of elevation, a sense of warmth, expansion, uplift. Also feelings of moral awe, intense group solidarity, a sense of belonging and connection, and often profound joy or even ecstasy. Self-interest diminishes, and concern for the group or the shared purpose becomes paramount. People become more trusting, cooperative, and even altruistic towards fellow group members in these states.
Wow. That sounds amazing, actually. That feeling of intense connection and purpose. It feels like that must be a peak human experience.
It really can be. Experiencing that profound joy and transcendence of unity, that feeling of being part of something truly magnificent, a collective energy that's bigger than any individual, it's incredibly powerful and deeply rewarding. It taps into that fundamental groupishness we just talked about.
But as with all powerful forces, there's a potential downside, right?
Absolutely. Haidt is very clear about this. That exhilarating feeling of unity needs to be tempered by an acute awareness of the potential risks. The risk of blind conformity, where individual critical thought gets completely submerged within the overwhelming pull of the collective will. The risk of groupthink, where dissent is suppressed and bad decisions get made because everyone is caught up in the hive mentality.
And the risk of us versus them getting amplified.
Exactly. The intense bonding within the hive can simultaneously lead to increased suspicion, hostility, or dehumanization of those outside the hive. So this realization can be both exhilarating, highlighting our amazing human capacity for collective good, for selfless action, for achieving things far beyond individual capability, but it's also deeply cautionary about the dark side of unchecked group loyalty, where the hive can act without individual moral compasses, sometimes leading to horrific outcomes.
It makes you understand the magnetic pull of these experiences, though. Why people seek them out in concerts, rallies, religious services, team sports. They're tapping into something fundamental about the human need for belonging, collective purpose, and shared meaning. It feels good to lose yourself sometimes.
It does, and when we connect this to the broader picture, we have so many rich U.S. examples of the hive switch in action, particularly in large-scale communal events that bring people together physically. Think about the electric atmosphere at major music festivals. Bonnaroo, Coachella, Lollapalooza, maybe even something more countercultural like Burning Man. You have hundreds of thousands of people moving, dancing, camping, celebrating together in a shared, often intense experience, creating a palpable collective energy, a temporary utopian community.
Or sports.
Oh, definitely. Consider the incredible collective energy at major sporting events. Think about the celebrations when a city's team wins a major championship, like the Super Bowl or the World Series. The entire city feels united for a moment. Or think about the intense game day experiences at huge college football stadiums, especially in the SEC or Big Ten, where entire towns transform into a single roaring entity, dressed in the same colors, doing the same chants, deeply invested in a shared outcome. It's pure hive mentality.
What about national events?
Sure. Looking at 2025, imagine if there is a major global event that evokes strong national unity, perhaps a collective response to a large-scale natural disaster hitting part of the country, or maybe celebrating unexpected victories at the Olympics. These moments can flip that switch nationally, bringing people together across political divides, at least temporarily, in a shared feeling of us. And more deliberately orchestrated events, too. Military parades with their synchronized marching, the collective singing of the national anthem before a game, even highly emotional political rallies with charismatic speakers and responsive crowds. These can all be powerful triggers for the hive switch, generating intense feelings of shared identity, loyalty, and purpose.
And music and movement are key ingredients.
The role of music with its shared rhythms and melodies and synchronized movement, whether it's marching, dancing, chanting, or even just standing and swaying together, seems especially powerful in creating this sense of shared identity, overriding individual differences, and fostering collective purpose by literally getting bodies and emotions moving in unison.
So hate is really revealing the potent power of togetherness here and the psychological mechanisms that make it so powerful.
Indeed. He's showing us how these hive switch moments, these experiences of collective effervescence and self-transcendence are arguably essential for human flourishing, for building strong communities, for motivating collective action, and for accomplishing great things that require coordinated effort and shared sacrifice. But they also demand, he cautions, a conscious awareness of their potential for both profound good and significant ill. It encourages us to seek out and appreciate these unifying experiences and their power, while simultaneously urging us to maintain our critical faculties, our individual moral compasses, so we can appreciate the unity without losing ourselves entirely to potential groupthink or intergroup hostility. It's a delicate, crucial balance to strike.
Finding the sweet spot between individual and collective. Okay, fascinating stuff. If you've ever felt that hive switch flip, let us know with a like, subscribe, or share. Next, hate applies this directly to one of humanity's most powerful groupish institutions, religion. Okay, so if we humans have these deep groupish instincts baked in by evolution, and we possess these psychological hive switches that allow us to temporarily merge into a collective.
It makes a lot of sense that one of humanity's oldest, most widespread, and most enduring institutions would tap into precisely those mechanisms.
Right, religion. Haidt argues that faith isn't just a solo journey of personal belief. It's often, maybe primarily, a powerful collective activity, a rally that both unites people intensely within the group and, sometimes tragically, divides them from other groups.
He views religion not simply as a set of individual beliefs about God or the supernatural, but through the compelling lens of group dynamics and social function. He moves beyond theological arguments to understand religion's fundamental role in human society and psychology.
And this perspective really changes how you look at religious practice, doesn't it? Even if you're not religious yourself, you start to see it less as just a collection of doctrines and more as a profound social technology evolved over millennia.
What's truly fascinating, and potentially controversial again for some, is how Haidt masterfully reframes religion in Chapter 11. He argues it's not merely about individual beliefs or personal relationships with the divine, though that's certainly part of it for many believers. He emphasizes its function as a crucial social and moral institution that powerfully, and often very effectively, leverages those hive switch mechanisms we just discussed.
To what end? Why leverage the hive switch?
To bind individuals together into cohesive, cooperative moral communities. He argues that religion functions in many crucial ways as a powerful team sport.
Religion as a team sport. Explain that.
He means it's a complex system, often involving beliefs, myths, rituals, and moral codes that seems almost intrinsically designed, whether consciously or through cultural evolution, to foster group cohesion, trust, cooperation, and commitment among its members. It makes people better team players.
So it's not just about personal belief in a deity. It's profoundly about belonging and collective action.
Haidt argues the social bonding aspect is primary, or at least equally important as the belief aspect, especially from an evolutionary or functional perspective. This team sport aspect includes a whole host of practices that are incredibly effective at building community and flipping the hive switch. Think about shared rituals, communal prayer sessions, singing hymns together, participating in sacraments like communion or baptism, collective fasting during Ramadan, attending weekly services. These synchronize behavior and emotion.
Sacred texts.
Sacred texts provide a common narrative, a shared history, a collective mythology, and crucially, a shared moral code that guides behavior and defines acceptable conduct within the group. Everyone is reading from the same playbook, so to speak.
And collective worship itself.
Collective worship, often involving music, chanting, synchronized movement, and shared emotional experiences in sacred spaces, is a powerful hive switch activator. It reinforces group identity and loyalty, making people feel connected to each other and to something larger than themselves. All these elements, beliefs, rituals, texts, codes, shared experiences, work synergistically together to foster an incredibly strong sense of in-group cohesion, encouraging cooperation, mutual support, trust, and even remarkable acts of altruism and self-sacrifice among members of the religious team.
Okay, that explanation really leads to a significant emotional turning point, I think. It allows you to appreciate the profound role religion plays in community formation, in creating social capital, in providing meaning and structure for billions of people. even if you yourself are not religious or disagree with specific doctrines.
You can see its immense functional value as a binding agent, a creator of community, a motivator of cooperation.
Exactly. But as Haidt also points out, this appreciation is often tempered, has to be tempered, by noting the exclusionary edges that can arise when that group loyalty becomes paramount.
The dark side of the team sport.
Yeah. When that team sport mentality goes unchecked, when the focus on the in-group, us, the believers, the righteous, becomes too intense, it can easily lead to an us versus them mentality. It can foster suspicion, prejudice, intolerance, or even outright hostility and violence towards outgroups, the non-believers, the heretics, people of different faiths.
So you end up discussing this complex, dual nature of religion. It's undeniably been a source of profound connection, comfort, meaning, artistic inspiration, charitable work, and shared purpose for countless people throughout history, a powerful force for good in many ways.
But it has also, regrettably, been a significant driver of intense conflict, persecution, division, and war throughout history and continuing today. It's this incredibly powerful tool, capable of both immense good and great harm, precisely because it's so effective at binding groups together and motivating them.
And connecting this to the contemporary U.S. context in 2025, we see both sides of this coin constantly. On one hand, you see ongoing, important U.S. interfaith dialogues and initiatives aimed at bridge building. Different religious communities trying to find common moral ground, perhaps focusing on the shared value of care harm, working together on poverty relief, or shared principles of fairness, advocating for social justice, allowing them to cooperate despite significant theological differences.
Finding the common ground between the teams.
Exactly. You also see the vital role religious institutions play in U.S. community organizing, running charities, providing social services, and mobilizing people for social justice movements. Churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, and other faith-based organizations often act as powerful anchors in communities, demonstrating their incredible power to unite people for common causes, building social capital that benefits everyone.
But the other side is visible too.
Unfortunately, yes. Conversely, religious differences can significantly exacerbate political polarization and social divides within U.S. society. This happens especially when a specific religious identity becomes almost inextricably linked with a particular political party or ideology.
Like the religious right or the religiously unaffiliated left.
Precisely. When that happens, religious differences become political differences, and political differences become religious differences, creating deeper, more emotionally charged chasms between groups, and making compromise or mutual understanding exceedingly difficult. It turns politics into a holy war, almost literally.
So Haidt is masterfully reframing religious belief here, not just as a matter of personal faith, but as a potent social and psychological force deeply rooted in our evolved nature.
Absolutely. He's highlighting its deep psychological roots in our groupishness and hive psychology, and its profound impact on human behavior, both for good and ill, both within groups promoting cooperation, and between groups, sometimes promoting conflict. It encourages us, regardless of our own beliefs, to look beyond purely theological differences and to instead understand the underlying fundamental human needs for belonging, for shared moral order, for collective purpose, and for transcendent experiences that religion often so powerfully fulfills. It's a lens for understanding a crucial aspect of humanity.
A really powerful reframing. Okay, if this perspective on religion as a team sport offers new insights, please like, subscribe, or share. In our final chapter, Haidt brings it all together and asks, can we use this knowledge to disagree better? All right, we've been on quite a journey. We've explored our intuitive elephants and rational writers, mapped the moral taste buds, wrestled with our weird biases, understood our deep groupishness, the power of the hive switch, and even religion as a team sport.
It's a lot of powerful, sometimes unsettling insights into human nature and morality.
It really is. And after unpacking all of that, after seeing how our minds seem almost designed for justification and group conflict, it could feel a little overwhelming, maybe even a bit hopeless. Like we're just destined to be divided, constantly misunderstanding and battling each other.
You could definitely leave you feeling that way if you stop there.
But Jonathan Haidt doesn't leave us there, does he? In this final chapter, he brings everything together and culminates his journey not with despair, but by offering practical paths forward. He asks the crucial question, can't we all disagree more constructively?
He argues that disagreement, even profound moral disagreement, Doesn't have to destroy relationships, communities, or societies. It can actually be productive. It can even build bridges if we understand how our minds truly work and adjust our approach accordingly.
So this is where all the insights we've gained about the elephant, the writer, the foundations, the groupishness come together into a hopeful, practical roadmap for navigating our often fractured world.
Exactly. What's truly fascinating here is that Haidt doesn't just diagnose the problem. He offers potential treatments, grounded in the psychology he's laid out. He doesn't leave us wallowing in the sometimes deterministic feel of our moral psychology. Instead, he offers actionable paths toward mutual understanding and cooperation, even amidst profound differences.
And what's the core principle for doing that, if there's one key takeaway?
He emphasizes one crucial, overarching strategy, echoing the elephant and rider model. To move beyond division, to have any hope of constructive dialogue, we must appeal to the elephant first.
Speak to the intuition, the emotion before the reason.
Yes. That means making an effort to reach for emotions, to acknowledge the other person's feelings, to find shared values even if they're weighted differently, to connect on the level of our common humanity. It's about building rapport, establishing trust, showing respect before you start engaging the writer with your brilliant facts, logic, and counter-arguments.
You have to prepare the emotional ground first. Make the elephant feel safe and respected, not attacked.
Precisely. Only then, once that connection is established, can you effectively engage the writer. Only then might the other person be open to actually considering your perspective, your facts, your logic. Trying to lead with writer-to-writer debate when the elephants are hostile or defensive is almost always futile.
So what are some specific strategies he suggests for appealing to the elephant or bridging divides?
He highlights several practical strategies. One is actively trying to find shared moral foundations. Even if you disagree strongly on one issue, maybe you can find common ground based on a different foundation you both value. Perhaps you both care deeply about children, or you both value national security, loyalty, authority, or you both resent government overreach, liberty. Starting from that shared value can build a bridge.
Look for the overlap in your moral matrices.
Exactly. Another key strategy is fostering positive intergroup contact. Decades of social psychology research show that meaningful, cooperative contact between members of different groups, especially when working towards a shared goal, can break down stereotypes, reduce prejudice, and help us see the humanity in the other side. It turns them into real people.
So getting different groups to actually interact constructively.
Yes. And critically, he also suggests recognizing the common enemy of division itself. Instead of framing the conflict as us versus them, liberals versus conservatives, etc., perhaps we can reframe it as all of us versus the problem of polarization, misunderstanding, and societal dysfunction. By uniting against the problem of division rather than against each other, we can often find surprising common ground and a shared motivation to cooperate.
That feels like a really powerful emotional turning point right there, that shift in perspective.
It can be profoundly hopeful.
Yeah, moving from seeing division as this inevitable, unchangeable, almost natural disaster to recognizing it as a solvable problem, albeit a very complex and difficult one. That shift alone inspires a sense of agency, doesn't it? It suggests there are practical steps we can take towards fostering better dialogue and understanding.
It counters the potential cynicism that the earlier chapters might induce.
And it can be incredibly empowering to realize that while our minds are indeed often built to justify and divide, they also possess this profound inherent capacity for empathy, for connection, for cooperation, for finding common ground. The hive switch can be used for good too. It's not a lost cause. Our shared humanity still offers us a way forward.
You really feel the potential for both personal and societal growth when we start approaching disagreement armed with this new, more nuanced understanding of human moral psychology. It gives you a sense of agency that you, individually, can make a difference in how conversations unfold just by changing your approach.
So how can we apply this in the U.S. context, maybe looking at 2025 and beyond? The calls for unity often feel so hollow.
Well, Haidt's work gives substance to those calls. We can apply these principles directly to the ongoing need for unity and constructive dialogue in a fractured U.S. society. Think about potential initiatives for bipartisan cooperation in Congress. If leaders genuinely want to succeed, Haidt's work suggests they need to do more than just negotiate policy details. They need to find ways to appeal to the shared moral foundations of both parties, maybe shared patriotism, loyalty, a shared concern for national strength, authority, or a shared desire for economic opportunity, fairness, liberty. They need to build trust and respect, speak to the elephants before the riders can effectively compromise.
What about at the community level?
Consider the growing number of community-led dialogue programs designed specifically to bring together diverse groups with differing viewpoints, maybe bridging urban and rural divides, different racial or ethnic groups, or people with opposing political views. These programs often succeed when they consciously apply principles of moral psychology, fostering empathy, encouraging active listening, finding shared values, focusing on personal stories, which engage the elephant, and working on common local problems.
And even online, can we do anything about the dumpster fire of social media?
It's harder, but Haidt's principles still apply. Efforts to depolarize social media conversations often encourage more thoughtful, less reactive engagement. This might mean pausing before reacting emotionally, letting the writer catch up to the elephant, trying to understand the moral foundation behind someone's provocative post before attacking, using less inflammatory language, and actively seeking out perspectives different from your own. It requires conscious effort.
It really underscores the immense importance of genuine listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk, but truly trying to understand why the other person feels the way they do, and cultivating profound curiosity even, maybe especially, when you're confronted with views that trigger your own elephant or activate your hive switch in opposition.
It's about taking that crucial step back from immediate judgment and asking, maybe just internally at first, why do they feel that way? What moral foundation is this belief rooted in for them? What are they trying to protect? Before immediately countering with your own rational arguments or moral condemnations.
So Haidt isn't just leaving us with a fascinating theory about human nature. He's actually giving us practical tools, a kind of user's manual for our moral minds, aimed at building a better tomorrow.
Absolutely. He's urging us, challenging us, to actively apply these insights in our daily lives, in our families, our workplaces, our communities, our online interactions, and our engagement with broader society.
And the ultimate provocation, the final question he leaves us with, is really personal, isn't it?
It is. It's this. Armed with this knowledge about our intuitive elephants, our rationalizing writers, our moral taste buds, our groupish nature, can you change how you engage in difficult conversations? Can you choose to speak to the elephant first? Can you seek the shared moral ground? Can you be the person who helps build bridges instead of digging trenches in a world that desperately needs more connection?
Can understanding our moral psychology actually change the conversation itself, one interaction at a time?
That's the hopeful challenge he leaves us with. It truly starts with understanding, and then, crucially, with conscious action based on that understanding. #outro.
And that brings us to the end of this really profound, extensive deep dive into Jonathan Haidt's work as explored in The Moral Compass. Thank you so much for illuminating these complex and sometimes challenging ideas for us with such depth and clarity.
It's truly been an insightful journey for me, too, exploring it again through this lens, and I sincerely hope our listener, you, have found it as revealing and perhaps as potentially actionable as I have.
Truly, it feels like we've covered so much ground. We've journeyed from the primal, intuitive origins of our morality, grappling with the idea that our minds are often built to justify, not just to seek objective truth.
All the way to the nuanced ways this moral psychology shapes our politics, our group identities, our religious experiences, and fundamentally our ability or inability to connect with those who see the world differently.
We've wrestled with the memorable metaphors, the intuitive dog and its rational tail, the overwhelming power of the elephant compared to the writer.
And we explored the fascinating framework of the moral taste buds. Care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, liberty that help explain why we're so wonderfully and sometimes frustratingly morally diverse.
What feels so valuable about Haidt's work, as you've presented it, is that he offers us this lens not primarily to judge others or even ourselves, but first and foremost to understand.
Exactly. He encourages us to look at the disagreements, the political polarization, even our own strongly held opinions, and the differences we encounter daily, not as simple failures of intelligence or logic or goodwill on someone's part.
But as natural, predictable outgrowths of our deeply wired, evolved moral psychology, it's an invitation to cultivate curiosity about human nature, rather than defaulting to condemnation of those who differ.
And that perspective shift raises a really important final question for you, our listener, to take away from this deep dive. Knowing now, or having considered more deeply, that our minds are often built to justify, that the elephant often rules, and that we are emotional creatures, often searching for allies just as much as for truth.
What is one conversation you anticipate having, one ongoing disagreement in your life, or maybe even one of your own deeply held beliefs that you will now look at differently through this lens?
How might understanding the likely elephant and the differing moral taste buds of others in your own change your approach to building bridges, fostering understanding, or just disagreeing more constructively in our divided world, even in just one small interaction?
The real deep dive, in a way, starts now. It starts in how you choose to apply these insights, or not, to your own life, your own relationships, your own engagement with the world.
We really encourage you to reflect on these powerful, provocative ideas, and perhaps to continue exploring the rich, complex, and endlessly fascinating landscape of human morality and connection.
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive here on Book Podcast Zone. We look forward to exploring more fascinating books and ideas with you next time.